G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Happy summer solstice. It's 38 degrees. It's the Long Ranger. Towing a bucket. Man, it's hard to track these things. Five minutes to 3 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. "38 degrees. Under where there used to be trees. Once upon a time, my thermometer was inside the canopy. But the canopy has died off and retreated. And I've had the dead amputated. 9 crowns for $800. Actually, it worked out when I thought about it, counted it all up. So, happy summer solstice 2019. 3 fires on the outskirts of Sydney. Southern Highlands on fire. South Australia's on fire, the Adelaide Hills. Don't think Victoria's doing too badly. There's now only those 2 helicopters based at the Glen Innes Airport. The commercial honeybees. Are drinking at the 1919 vintage Trafalgar Cold Safe. As well as at the ultraviolet covers on the Chinese inflatable swimming pool. What they really seem to like is the suction hose port on the ultraviolet cover on the Prism framed pool. And they're flying half a kilometre to get here. So, the bees like the greenies anyway.
Level in New South Wales as the state faces a day of catastrophic fire danger. 2 fires on the south coast have been elevated to emergency level. The Currowan and Tianjara fires have been burning for some time. Other fires at Green Wattle Creek, Gross Valley, Palmer's Oakey and the Gospers Mountain mega fire are also at emergency level. The Great Western Highway is closed between Lithgow and Katoomba, blocking traffic from Sydney to the state's west. To the south, the Princes Highway is closed between the Wool Road, Basin View and Bendalong Road, Bendalong. The Hume Highway is closed between the Rellan Road, Campbelltown and the Old Hume Highway, Alpine. 1 person has been killed and more than 40,000 hectares destroyed in bushfires in South Australia. 1 person has died near Charleston in the Adelaide Hills. It comes after a 24-year-old man died in a car crash that sparked a bushfire in the state's Murraylands. South Australian Premier Steve Marshall, who's visiting bushfire response centres in the Adelaide Hills, has thanked firefighters.
My focus at the moment is not on my Christmas holidays, it's trying to make sure we get through this difficult period.
In Victoria, fires are out of control in East Gippsland at Martha Vale, northwest of Bairnsdale. The Great Alpine Road is closed between Ensay and Bruthen, with residents urged to stay indoors. Luke Hegarty from the State Control Centre says crews have been struggling to contain the fires.
They certainly saw overnight rapid fire development, so that was driven with the northerly winds that we had yesterday, and then also the southerly wind change influencing it, but this fire was large enough to be generating some of its own weather.
A 47-year-old man has been arrested over 3 grass fires in Melbourne's north. CFA attended 2 fires in Roxburgh Park and 1 in Craigieburn this morning and extinguished them with no damage to property. The Roxburgh Park man was arrested a short distance away. The charges also relate to fires dating back to October. Federal Liberal MP Trent Zimmerman has conceded that the Prime Minister's office should have been more transparent about Scott Morrison's decision to go on leave. Mr Morrison is expected to return to Sydney from Hawaii tonight after expressing deep regret for any offence caused by going on holiday during the bushfire crisis. Mr Zimmerman says the Prime Minister's team could have handled the situation better.
When he planned that holiday, I don't think he could have predicted the way they've escalated. He's made the right decision in coming back early, and he's obviously conveyed his profound regret for the fact that that has created a perception he's been absent during a difficult time for the nation.
Thousands of protesters have marched across the Sydney Harbour Bridge to the Prime Minister's Sydney residence, Kirribilli House, calling for action on climate change. Cindy Bryce reports.
The bushfire crisis in New South Wales and across the country has been the major driver for today's protesters. Chanting "Our country is on fire," young and old walked across the Harbour Bridge, blocking traffic. The protesters sat down in front of the Prime Minister's Sydney residence and chanted, watched closely by police. Many say they'll keep protesting throughout the summer. Cindy Bryce, ABC News, Kirribilli.
US President Donald Trump has signed a law that will impose sanctions on any firm that helps Russia's state-owned gas company Gazprom complete a pipeline.
Yeah. So, Scott the Morrison family's moron son decided, in his laid-back sort of a way, to take a holiday just before Christmas so he could come back and celebrate Australia Day, Invasion Day. Or is it going to be Unvasion Day? Another month of this sort of weather? Might be a bloody interesting idea, mightn't it? Now, the reason Scott Morrison, Michael MacMamarra, Barnaby Joyce, Josh Frydenberg, the entire Liberal national leadership clique, the reason they didn't take this drought seriously 2 or 3 years ago when it was starting out is because we just had the millennial drought, a 10-year drought, worst that anybody could remember since the Federation drought, and they were certain they weren't going to have to face another one of them in their political lifetimes. They were certain of that because they were clinging to a rear vision view of predicting the future, really. You have a look at what's happened in the past and that's what's going to happen again in the future, because everything moves in cycles, you see. That was their belief. Still is their belief. And my guess is that at least 40 years ago, the first time in a science classroom they encountered the idea of anthropogenic global warming, they thought about it for a bit and they decided, no, that can't be right. They didn't pay attention to it, they didn't examine the data, they just decided that can't be right. And they decided it can't be right because if it's right, then the whole of capitalist, industrialist, broadacre agricultural civilization for the last 12,000 years has been busting its guts sweating its ass off, working to make everything worse. Because the whole idea of broadacre, agro-cultist, harvest everythingism is to take everything that's been genetically engineered by thousands of generations of living here and bulldoze that and replace it with a single artificial hybrid species of plant, either as a crop in itself or to feed to a single line-bred, more or less artificial hybrid species of animal, so that you can raise a surplus and then over-harvest your surplus and send it to market and monetize it. And when you try and explain to an economist, from the Greek nomos, which means to know things, you know, the gnomon is the part of a sundial that knows what the time is, because the style on the gnomon is the edge which casts the shadow which tells the time. So an economist is somebody who thinks they know everything. The economists, when they're confronted by the fact that broadacre agro-cultist harvest everythingism is trying to take everything that's designed to be there and bulldoze it and get rid of it and grow something else that's not designed to live there, and therefore it's bound to fail, it's doomed to fail, it creates deserts everywhere it goes. They just turn their nose up and say, oh no, technological progress, we'll find answers to all of these problems, we always have. You know, the Babylonians invented irrigation and they dug wells. Well, they dug wells because the rain had stopped. The rain stopped because they clear-felled their forests. They clear-felled their forests to establish their broad-acre fields of monocultures. And when the rain stopped and there wasn't enough water in the rivers, they dug into the bloody ground and they got underground water, and surprise, surprise, water under the ground is salty. When I was showing you the bees, did you see the white powdery stuff on the ultraviolet covers? Dissolved salts coming out of solution as the bore water evaporates. All I can say is that having water is better than not having water. Ask any of these trees, not just the ones that have died after last year's failed attempt at epicormal regrowth, or the ones that have got fresh green shoots in response to the 75 mils of rain we had a couple of weeks ago, as topped up by the little bits that I can put out through my sprinkler systems. Ask trees like this one, which have actually succeeded in having another attempt at epicormal or epicormic regrowth. Fresh green shoots in an otherwise dying forest, although there's little green leaves up there as well. So yes, the Babylonians and their agriculture and their irrigation, I can understand it, because when it's all said and done, I too am an irrigator. I am attempting to irrigate this little 1.5 acres, turn it into a green oasis, hoping that it won't burn quite as fiercely as the surrounding dried fuel. And if it's not burning quite as fiercely as all that, then maybe I might be able to persuade the fire to go around me. But the point is, the financiers, the economists, the bankers, the money lenders, they can't cope with the idea that it's not possible to predict how much of an environmental surplus there's going to be, even if you've got an unspoiled ecology and a good average year. You just can't predict it in advance. So tying anybody into an agreement that every year for 20 years they're going to produce this amount and they're going to pay that amount, and therefore the moneylender's going to get rich and the borrower will eventually come out of debt and they'll still own something worth having, it's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. As soon as somebody's got a debt, they can then no longer afford to have a fallow field. Like assuming they've gone for the whole stationary farmer rave, you know, stopping in one spot, being a slash and burn artist who fails to move along. Once upon a time, if they had 4 fields, they'd be growing things in 3 of them, and one of the fields would be having a rest for a year. It was called the fallow field, and it rotated. As soon as you go into debt, oh no. No. You have to raise your productivity so that you can afford to live as well as pay back the money you've borrowed, and then you've got to pay back the interest on it. And if you have a bad year, well, tough. You just got to flog your block harder next year to make up for it, because you pay the interest and the debt continues to accrue. And eventually, you or your children finish up homeless, bankrupt, destitute, and the moneylender owns your land. And they lend some other idiot the money to buy it off them. And that's how we turn the place into desert. Apparently, my forest's been dying because somebody cut down the forest in Borneo so that they could grow bloody palm oil to feed synthetic diesel to the EuroPeon so they could feel good about being greenies. Thank you very much. And then Volkswagen went and fudged all the figures, so it didn't actually save much pollution at all. It just fucked ecologies at both ends of the river in the sky. So anyway, back to the story of Barnaby and Morrison and Frydenberg and MacMamarra. And they didn't think they would have to do anything in a policy sense because they didn't believe in global warming, because they found the conclusions unpalatable 40 years ago. And the longer the drought went on, the more entrenched became their opinion they didn't need to do anything, because after a drought there's always a flood. Droughts always end with a big heap of rain, and therefore the longer it's gone on since it's rained anywhere, the more likely it is that there will be rain soon, because it all moves in cycles inside their little mind, because they don't pay attention to atmospheric chemistry and physics and thermodynamics. In the case of Morrison, the moron son of the Morrison clan, he's afflicted with a particular species of God theory which involves lying on the ground and foaming at the mouth and speaking in tongues and biting pieces out of the carpet, otherwise impersonating Adolf Hitler in a rage. But that's how they say they worship their God theory. They do it generally on a Wednesday night in the basement of the local Pentecostal church. You know, it's not all of them do it, it's a subgroup, but it's considered a legitimate part of their religious rituals and practices. It's how they talk to their God theory. So we've got a Prime Minister who goes in for that sort of shit. And recently he was going over to the excited status of Norte Armed Americano to talk to an Australian expatriate called Pratt. Now, Pratt is an English term for a fucking idiot. So he's going over to America to meet an Australian called fucking idiot. I mean Pratt. Okay, and Pratt, like Rupert Murdoch before him, decided that he couldn't make enough money by living in Australia and employing Australians to do things in Australia. So he's opening a cardboard box manufacturing plant in California. Trumpy doesn't go over very well in California, so he is delighted to be invited by a fucking idiot, I mean Pratt, to open the cardboard box factory. And Pratt also, because he's not as fucking silly as he sounds, he invites Scott, the Morrison family's moron son, to come over and attend the opening, the grand opening of the cardboard box making factory financed by Australia in California, because Morrison's really good at exporting jobs. So he goes there. And when he gets there, he finds that he's gone to talk to Pratt and he's finished up at a Trump rally. Another one coming. Okay, so here in Australia, the faithfuls turn on their TVs and they find that first up, ScoMo, what they call Scott Morrison, he's gone to a bloody Donald Trump Republican Party rally in the middle of their congressional elections, helping Trump endorse some corrupt halfwit who lost his attempt to become a congressman. And here in Australia, a lot of people were not real happy with that, seeing our Prime Minister on the podium at a Trump rally. And then ScoMo was going to a White House dinner. He was invited, come along, you know, bring your missus and your billy lids and a bit of an entourage. So ScoMo says, oh, is it okay if I bring my preacher, my parson, my spiritual mentor and guide from the Pentecostal Church of Foaming at the Mouth and gibbering in tongues, giving forth ectoplasm perhaps. And Donald Trump's White House, they take on some pretty seedy characters, you know. Have a look at some of the people who've worked for the Donald Trump administration and since gone to jail. And they say to ScoMo, no, you can't bring your pastor from the Sydney Hillsong Church, mate. Oh, why would that be, says Morrison, the moron's son. Well, you see, said the White House, your pastor came up for a dishonourable mention in the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in institutions, particularly the religious ones, because your parson, he was kind of infamous for shielding a notorious pedophile predator who was a Pentecostal parson, Scott Morrison's parson's father. That's who Morrison goes to for advice about his God theory. A pedophile protector, son of a pedophile. And he wonders why the White House wouldn't let him bring such a scurrilous rat bag to a White House dinner, because cameras would be looking. You know, the US networks would examine the fella's background. Who is this jerk? When the Australian networks got wind of the situation, they asked Morrison's office in Canberra. Oh, what a lot of gutter snipe, low-level journalistic gossip, said Morrison's office. Wouldn't deign to answer, because it's true. There's a big fanfare going on about how he snuck out of the country and he went to Hawaii and he was having a holiday with his missus and kids and he wants to come back and he's trying very hard to come back. And you know why he's not back here yet? Because he didn't stop in fucking Hawaii. According to what I heard from a member of the Greens Party in the Glendennis Main Street yesterday, ScoMo, Scott, the moron son of the Morrison family, he was on his way to open a new Hillsong church in the excited status of Norte Armed Americano. And that's why it's taken him so long to get back to Australia, where the country's on fire and people are dying because, you know, 38 degrees here, it's a whole new temperature record. We've had 4 absolute record hot days in Australia this week in the history of taking records. Scott Morrison's the bloke who took a piece of coal and had it varnished so that when he held it up in his hands in Parliament saying, oh, look, it's a piece of coal, don't be afraid of it, there's great wealth in coal, it wouldn't get his hands dirty. Scott Morrison is an individual who thinks that he can get God to do what he wants. He thinks he can get his God to tick off in heaven on anything that he dreams up because he foams at the mouth and he speaks in tongues at the Church of the Pentecostal Fruit Loops. And they don't believe in global warming, let's face it. Probably 30 years ago, when everybody who understood what was happening never spoke of climate change, everybody spoke of global warming. Global warming was the problem. It's caused by anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon dioxide. If you get a glass jar of air and a glass jar of nitrous oxide and a glass jar of pure oxygen and a glass jar of carbon dioxide, and you can do this, you know, like go and buy some nitrous oxide in a little party pop cream whipper capsule, buy some oxygen, you can get them at the chemist, an oxygen snorter, You can get a glass jar of air. You can get a McCormack coffee jar and hold it under the exhaust of your car, and you can get some carbon dioxide. Get your glass jars of different gases. Measure the temperature in the shade. Take them out into the sun. Measure the temperature at intervals. See which one heats up the most. In the 1850s, a lady in Europe figured it out. The carbon dioxide heats up the most, gets the hottest, fastest. Put them back in the shade. The carbon dioxide stays hottest the longest. It's a greenhouse gas. It causes global warming. Global warming adds energy to the weather system. It makes everything more. The storms are stormier, the winds are windier, the droughts are droughtier, the heat waves are hottier. The hail is hailier, the rain is rainier, the floods are floodier. So, the snowstorms are snowier and stormier where they occur. In the early days, as the first fluctuations and perturbations began to work their way through the system, every time there was an unusually late or early or heavy snowfall, the forces of denial, the lobbyists for fossil fuel burning and extraction, would point to it and say, oh, look, it can't possibly be global warming because there's a fucking snowflake. Right. Another one of their arguments, and I don't know who brought it up, but somebody said, global warming is going to occur, the climate will change. There will be climate change. And as soon as they said there will be climate change as a result of global warming, the forces of fossil fuel lobbyism retorted with, but the climate's always been changing. Personally, I believe it was an inspired piece of propaganda and marketing jism on the behalf of the fossil fuel lobby, who started to introduce the term climate change. Because once you started talking climate change, you're pinned in this illogical lexicographical trap, a semantic trap. Oh, the climate's always been changing. Yeah, well, the climate has changed over millennia, eons. We're talking major climate change, tipping point climate change, and it's all warming. Nowhere on Earth is becoming overall cooler because the whole bloody Earth is getting hotter. Sure, every so often you get an unusual cold snap, you know, like when you disturb the Arctic jet stream and gusts of polar air escape from whirling around the North Pole and they squirt down and you get snow in Texas. That doesn't mean the world is cooling. It means the homeostasis mechanisms that keep the biosphere intact are losing control of the weather, losing control of the climate. But it's global warming, it's not climate change. 25 years ago, the science communicators and the science publishers, the people who try to get through to the vox populi, what's actually going on, they decided that there was no point fighting that hook. They accepted the terminology of climate change, and now if you speak of global warming, you get denialists claiming, oh, what are you talking about global warming? I thought it was climate change. Ha ha, you're changing your story. I don't think we're changing our story. We said 40, 50 years ago. We said 150 years ago. I wasn't here to say it, but there were people who were saying it. If you keep on digging up that black shit and burning it and putting it in the sky, you will heat everything up. And it won't be fun. Well, it's not fun, is it, eh? I think Australia's probably getting close to having lost 1,000 houses this year. And here's a funny point. Those helicopters I've been videoing, who do you think pays for that? The Rural Fire Service? Who do you think pays for that? 13% of the Rural Fire Service's funding comes from local councils, paid for by my rates. So yeah, I can expect a little bit of a fire truck up here, perhaps. 13% of a fire truck. 13% is paid for by the state government out of fuel levies, state taxes, land tax, transfer taxes, stamp duty they call it. Buy a car, you've got to pay stamp duty. Buy land, you've got to pay stamp duty. Percentage to the government based on how much money changes hands. They take their cut. So yeah, I might even get 26% of a fire truck because I pay state fuel levies as well as local council rates. Who pays the other 74%? The Insurance Council of Australia pays the other 74% because before global warming reared its head and changed the climate, only about 11% of houses in Australia were not insured. So the Insurance Council funds the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Brigade in the towns and the cities. They also fund the rural fire services. And when there's a fire, the brigades go out and put the fire out. And therefore, the insurance companies have less money to fork out. That's why they're interested in the deal. Now, here's another little interesting curiosity about the insurance industry. The price of the premium is always 600% of the cost of the risk. So, if the likelihood of my palatial mansion having its roof removed in a thunderstorm is 1 in every 300 years, one time in 300 years, a mini tornado will come and rip the roof off. Then some people think that the insurance premium on covering the roof against storm and tempest should be maybe 1/250th of the cost of fixing the roof. No. Certainly not 1/300th of the cost, because that's the actual cost of the risk. The premium will be 1/50th of the cost of replacing the roof. So that if next year's twice as bad as any year that's ever happened, the insurance company can afford to provide 2 roofs for the insured customer. Then they need another roof to pay all their operating costs. They need another roof to divide up among the shareholders, dividends. They need another roof for Christmas bonuses. And they need another roof to issue in shares to the company directors. This year we've lost 1,000 houses, roughly, to the bushfires. And if we haven't, well, we'll punch through the 1,000 next week or the week after. That's more than 6 times as many houses got burnt last year. So the insurance companies are already getting on pretty hard times. They're going to have to pay out a whole lot more money than they expected to pay out. And when that happens to them, they respond by putting the actuaries in there to recalculate the actual contemporary risk. So anybody who's used to being able to just barely afford to insure their house against fire because they live in the Australian forest, and there's been a relatively stable risk of fire when you live on the interface in Australia, but we've got it under control more or less. Suddenly there's this big change. We've missed out on 1 year's rain in a 2-year period. Last year we missed out on 340 mils. This year we've missed out on 460 mils. We normally get 850 mils. That's happened all over the east coast of Australia. The odds are changing. The statistics are different. The data is at variance with all known history. And the climate scientists say, yeah, that's right. We told you this was going to happen 40 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. President Eisenhower established the NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, specifically to study this sort of shit, because he was told, we're burning too much coal and oil, we're going to make a mess of the climate. Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House. Ronald Reagan pulled them down again because solar panels were a green initiative and greenism was being funded by the Soviet Union in Europe as a protest against American missiles in European countries. So therefore, wanting a solar panel made you a communist. And it's been disciples of trickle-down economics where the rich people piss all over the poor that have been running the show in the excited status ever since. Bottom line is, premiums to cover your house for fire insurance in Australia are going to go through the roof next year. It'll probably be a 200 to 500% increase. What that will do is anybody who really, really, really wants to insure their house will move away from a fire-prone area. However, as they're about to discover, suburbs and cities and towns will burn on a day like today. Up here it's good, it's only 38 degrees and bugger all wind, and we've got about 27% humidity. Down south, they're talking 48 degrees, 100-kilometre-an-hour winds. They're losing houses probably by the dozen, if not by the score. And as I've long prophesied, by the end of January, all the fire trucks and all the helicopters and all the crop dusters, they're all going to be down for servicing when the real heat gets here. This is the summer solstice today, the 21st of December, 21st, 22nd. Generally, Australia gets its maximum temperatures at the end of January, the start of February. December, January, February are our summer months. So this is still just the build-up. Scott Morrison back in April refused to have a meeting with a bunch of retired fire and emergency services commissioners who wanted to beg him, pretty please, Prime Minister, instead of selling that squadron of 12 C-130 Herculeses, instead of selling them overseas because we want to buy new ones and they're old and tired and they're not quite shiny enough, and they haven't got the modern avionics and we just want new ones. Can we keep them? Can we refit them as large air tankers? Because at the moment, Australia has one large air tanker, a DC-10 or something. New South Wales owns it. All the other air tankers, the big ones, they're all privately owned and they're leased from somebody else. I'm pretty sure the Royal Australian Air Force, if they can fly F-35s, FA-18s, Chinooks, Pilatus PC-9s, if they can fly those things, they can be trained to fly their C-130s on a different mission. They can be trained to fly as fire bombers. They're young, they're highly skilled, they're highly educated, they love flying aeroplanes. If they didn't like dangerous flying, they would not have volunteered for the Air Force. It's not remotely like asking an infantryman to go and fight a fire with a hose when he's been trained to die in a ditch with a friggin' rifle. Yeah? And there's been a lot of people calling for that too. Oh, why can't they get the army in there? Not only is the military not trained for firefighting, it's equally inappropriate to ask the military to come and get on the fire line with a hose as it would be to ask a fireman to go and get in a foxhole with a fucking machine gun. It's a completely different mindset. Just think about it. When does the military go out and play a game by choice? When they think they're going to have an overwhelming tactical advantage in firepower, they're going to attack by surprise, they're going to hit an unsuspecting target, and after they sneak up on some fucking stranger and blow their brains all over the wall, then the military expects to be able to exfiltrate secretly and silently before their target's mates can notice and figure it out and show up for a return match. The military doesn't ever say, oh shit, this is coming our way and it's bigger and worse than anything we've got, but somebody's got to do something. Let's go out and stand in front of the firestorm and see if we can stop it from cooking that suburb. That is not what the military do. It's a different mindset. Different people join the military to the ones who join the volunteer fire service. The military relatively often fire themselves dry. If the firemen fire themselves dry, they get cooked in the burnover. Day before yesterday, 3 fire trucks were burnt over. 3 people went to hospital. My son said to me, well, at least we know the equipment and the training works. I said, what do you mean, son? And he said, think about it, old man. 3 trucks were burnt over and nobody died. Yes, 2 fellas were killed when the truck they were driving in convoy, in smoke, had a tree land on the cabin and knock it into the gully, rolled over on its side. But when a tree lands on the front 2 seats of the driving cabin, somebody's going to die if it's a big enough tree. Possibly the next thing that's going to have to be thought about is a retrofitting if possible. If not, just build it into the fleet as time goes by. Roll cages and tree protection cages over the top of the crew cabins on the fire trucks. Because on the 8th of November, my son had burning branches dropping on the roof of his cabin. He wasn't in convoy, so he was able to make the executive decision to not go any further at that time, wait for the visibility to clear, put some water on a burning fire station, and then when the visibility cleared and the wind changed to another direction, then he set sail again, and the first thing he found was a tree across the road. And he had to chainsaw his way through the tree to get onto the community house on Waitalabar during the firestorm. If he'd have been driving in convoy, like the two fellas who got killed, he wouldn't have had the authority to make the executive decision to stop because the visibility is too bad. That gets delegated up the chain of command to whoever has the most experience. My son's crew were lucky. He had the experience. He knew when to stop. After he went over the burning bridge, before he got into the smoke that was going to drop a tree on him. So, back to the story at hand. What's going to happen when nobody insures their house against fire and the Insurance Council of Australia then backs out of their deal to fund the Rural Fire Service, which is a volunteer organisation anyway? Gladys Berejiklian pulled, what was it, $148 million out of New South Wales firefighting budget 6 months ago because she wants to build a fucking sports stadium. Bread and circuses, you know, entertain the proletariat and they'll vote you back in. That's her theory. Make the economy grow. Give them a big construction project. Took 170-something rangers out of the Parks and Wildlife Service too. So there was nobody working for Parks and Wildlife to be able to do any hazard burns because the bean counters said, the political bean counters. And by the way, do you notice the response of these trees that were dead and brown a couple of weeks ago? Everything was the colour of these brown leaves. Not now. You look out there where I have not watered and things are pretty bloody bleak. You get in here to what's within range of my hoses and sprinklers and it's a bit greener. It's not perfect, but it's a bit better. Maybe enough to slow it down a bit. Australia at the moment is suffering from a complete leadership vacuum to the point where that committee of Fire and Emergency Services retired commissioners, they've announced that they want to have an emergency summit to talk to the people who are still in the fire services after the season subsides and when people have had a bit of downtime to reflect on things. And the reason these retired commissioners have called an emergency summit is, in their words, I'm quoting here, because of the complete leadership vacuum in Canberra and the Liberal National Party controlled states. What's got to happen now, probably underlined in burnt houses and dead citizens, is the electorate of Australia has to come to grips with the fact that the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, the National Party, the One Nation Party, the Clive Palmer Party, everybody who has been selling them on the daydream of burning more coal, more oil, more gas, so that they can pursue cheaper electricity, more economic growth, lower taxes, those are the people who have spent 40 years deliberately, willfully leading us into this situation. I've spent 40 years trying to say it politely. A few years ago, I started getting a little bit blunt. The vote green or die global warming coals stickers on my car have a May 2016 copyright date on them. So for at least 3.5 years, I've been a little bit in your face. telling people what a mistake it is to be led down the garden path by Barney Baby, the adulterous bastard breeder Joyce. And for reasons best known to themselves, my fellow citizens were not interested in anything that I had to say. It was inconvenient. It was annoying. I'm just a crazy old retired general nurse with 1/3 of a disability pension for a nurse's back, 1/3 of a disability pension for an ultralight motor glider test pilot's ankle, 1/3 of a disability pension for the short circuit between my ear holes which causes me to tell the truth in public places. And that particular short circuit was totally installed by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors and duly appointed minions, when the aforementioned convinced me of what happens when they catch someone who tells a lie. And you know what? I found it a humiliating experience. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. And I decided if that's what they do to liars, then fuck them, I'll tell them the truth. And if they don't like the truth, they should never have asked the question. And of course, having an attitude like that renders one functionally unemployable in public and private enterprise. So they've paid me to sit out here in the regrowth forest, the fool on the hill, thinking about what matters and learning to speak just a little bit of basic marsupial. Poor little fella's never seen 38 degrees before. I've never seen 38 degrees here before. I've seen 38 degrees in Tamworth, I've seen 38 degrees in Sydney, I've seen 38 degrees at Coffs Harbour and Grafton and Red Rock. Never before have I seen 38 degrees at Glen Innes. 1,113 metres above sea level, 30 degrees south of the equator, about 160 kilometres from the coast. Just not fair, is it, little fella, eh? And you didn't do it. No swamp wallaby ever made global warming. Did you, hey? You didn't do this. It's me and my bloody people. We did it. Yes, we did. Yep, that's right. You go and sit in the shade. Poor little bees, desperate for a drink. Tropical mango, even better than ginger beer. Multiple water points. Got to have multiple water points. Yes, multiple water points. Yes, there you go. You can have a bit of bread. A nice bit of shade to sit in the breeze. That right? So anyway, after that little segue, I'm feeding a panting little swamp wallaby who's now growing new fur where he lost a pretty good footprint worth to challenging the local alpha male. And he got himself a nickname, that's why he's called Furball. But after the distraction of feeding Furball, I'd just like to return for a moment to this vote green or die slogan. Yesterday when I was visiting my son, he had a puzzled look on his face and he handed me an envelope addressed to me, care of his workshop's address, posted a bit over a week ago. no return address. We have vote green or die in cursive written across a telephone bill for somebody who rings a lot of places on the coast, pretty much 100 miles north or south of a direct line from here to the coast. Woolgoolga, Kempsey, Eleonora, Merrimack, Warrangarry, lots to Warrangarry. Mobile, Sydney, mobile, Sydney, yeah. August 70. I'm guessing it's the business where this mysterious thing was made. Covering note in a different hand, a handmade gift for someone who appreciates handmade things. It's got your mantra on it together with an Aboriginal flag as a backdrop. Enjoy. So I have an actual YouTube summer solstice gift sent to me anonymously through the mail. I think I might perhaps be able to identify the handwriting. Mike Hunt is my guess. 2 words, lowercase, M-I-K-E-H-U-N-T. The same YouTube admirer who sent me a boomerang, a trifoil boomerang, and 3 very nice reference books a couple of years ago. So anyway, here's what Warble's got for summer solstice 2019. The week of the record high temperatures. The week of the fires that are eating 1,000 houses. Vote green or die. On an Aboriginal flag. Isn't that cute? I'm really pleased with that. Thank you very much, Mike Hunt, if it was Mike Hunt. Whoever else it was, if it was whoever else. You going to show up in there, or are you just going to hide in the shade? There we go. That should give us, yes, a swamp wallaby hiding in the shade. Eclipsed by a vote green or die on an Aboriginal flag. I think that's a very nice juxtaposition. And the second line, which didn't fit on the flag here, global warming culls. The culls is a verb if you agree with the idea of voting green or dying. And if you don't agree with that, then it's a noun, and you are the noun. Time to shit or get off the pot. If you vote to try and grow the economy in the face of global warming is winning, and it will cull you. Nobody needs to do anything to bring it about, because you've already done it. You have been burning fossil fuels for your convenience, just like I have been burning fossil fuels for my convenience. It takes 25 years for a cubic metre of carbon dioxide released to the atmosphere to achieve 95% of all the warming it's ever going to do. Backspool, 25 years, 1994, how much coal and oil and gas did you burn? I paid for, I voted with my wallet, I purchased 2,000 litres of refined transport fuel, and I burnt it, and it turned into 5 tonnes of carbon dioxide. And for 25 years, that 5 tonnes of carbon dioxide has been working to warm the planet, and now it's all finally done. What I'm putting up with this year is the result of what I did in 1994. What did you do in 1994, and what have you been doing since? Because I know I've cut my fuel consumption from 2,000 litres to 1,000 litres. But, you know, I'm just the fool on the hill, a local yokel, a mad scientist, a tree-hugging greenie, a kangaroo feeder, a wallaby waterer. And if I could see all this shit coming to the point where I actually did something about it, you know, I've walked the walk, I've paid rates on an endangered species sanctuary for 30 fucking years, and during the millennial drought, I saved a species of frog. It was biologically extinct at the start of the drought, and at the end of the drought, there were 180,000 tadpoles in one dam, and I had 3 dams full. So before Barnaby Joyce's fish-killing terminal drought got here, Latoria burralongensis had gone from biologically extinct to only critically endangered. I thought that was pretty good. Has something to have done. Along with watering the wallabies. Yes, this little fella's going to have a wash, aren't you, eh? That's it, you dip your elbows in, spread it all over you. Yes. Yes. You've already had a go at that, haven't you? That's right. You sit on the shady side of the building, getting cold air running underneath its floor. Yeah, you're a better passive solar architect than any and every human who ever designed and built any house which is plugged into the electric grid in order to heat and cool it. Because that there wallaby camped in the shade of my shithouse has a better idea of how to make the most of the prevailing conditions and how to shelter from the heat in a windy patch of shade. Either that or camp on the waterhole. Gone away to serenade somewhere else. Never mind. We'll stick with the wallabies. It's a distressed little wallaby too. Because they can't sweat. They can pant and they can lick their forearms. They can try and have a swim in the water dish. But he's overheating, and I'm overheating, and Australia's burning specifically because of the economists, the financiers, the fossil fuel lobby, anybody and everybody who works in the fossil fuel extraction, export and burning industries. They have done this to us for their own personal wealth and convenience because they want to be able to retire, collect their superannuation, sell up the McMansion, buy a Winnebago and drive endless circumnavigations around the continent on highway number 1 until finally they stroke out and finish up in a nursing home somewhere when they can no longer change the tyres on the Winnebago. And the die is pretty much cast. You pays your money and you takes your choice. And a couple of irrigation sprinklers and 9 fire hoses and 3 pumps is the best I can think of. What you're going to do about your global warming challenge is going to be up to you. If you think of anything better than this, do let me know. And don't, for God's sake, don't tell me to move anywhere else because the whole fucking world is already overcrowded. Everybody says, oh, well, I'll just move to Tasmania. The Taswegians down there will see you coming and regard you as a zombie. Somebody to be shot and shaken down for whatever they can contribute. Because that's what always happens when civilizations collapse. The fringe dwellers are the ones who've got the least distance to fall, and they are the ones who survive the fall best and recover the first. And if what we've done with global warming is unsurvivable, well, golly gosh, gee darn shucks. I'd still rather be on my home patch, on my ancestral homelands, doing what I can to adapt, like cutting down the dead trees so they don't stick around as a bushfire fuel hazard in the sky over my roof, rather than make myself homeless and run away and give somebody else the shits by appearing on their horizon when they're already stressed out and overpopulated as it is. So don't think you can migrate your way out of global warming. You're just going to have to stay where you are and adapt or die, because that's what your parents and your grandparents and your peer group have given you as your options. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. That really is the most delightful, refreshing, sugary drink of lolly water I've tasted for a very long time. Herewith, the 2019 Summer Solstice Festival rant, the Warble Rave. What do you think about that, Missy? Hey? Was that interesting? Look, see, bowerbird's pretty much panting too with its mouth open. Would you like a bit of bread? Hey? Would you like a bit of bread? Yes, I can do that for you. Want some bread? That's it. Only want a little bit, eh? Only wanted a little bit. Oh, yes, I see. You're just hot and looking for somewhere to pant. Poor little bugger. You didn't bloody cause global warming either, did you? Eh? You didn't do it. Not you nor the wallaby underneath the tripod. If in doubt, feed the wildlife. If in doubt, water the wildlife. Okay, you really wanted to be in the video too. Swamp wallaby, bowerbird, and a currawong too. A brace of currawongs actually. Feel better after a drink, do you? Hey? Feel better after a drink? Yeah, I don't think that bowerbird particularly wants to eat. I think it just wants somewhere cool to sit. And like the swamp wallaby, it's figured out that in the wind, in the shade of my hut, it's a cool place to sit. I concur. My front veranda is, indeed, a cool place to sit on the hottest day that we've ever had. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. And now I get to fire up the chainsaw and cut up the stuff that was too big to pick up by hand and start adding to the wood can with trailer number 21. An idea that leaves the bowerbird open-mouthed with horror. You're going to start the chainsaw here now, making all that noise, are you? Really, you're going to do that? And the answer is yeah, it's got to be done. Whether I want to or not. Ciao.